and a very warm welcome. You're watching an India Today special broadcast on the state of the Indian automobile sector, which currently finds itself in reverse gear. Slowdowns, shutdowns, layoffs, more than 300 dealerships being closed. Automobile manufacturers coming out and saying that at least 10 lakh people could be laid off. The industry is in panic. Remember, the automobile sector contributes about 25% of India's manufacturing GDP. What is the road forward? How do you bring this sector back into top gear? That's what we'll talk about over the next 1 hour. And for this discussion, we are joined by some of the sharpest, most experienced minds in India's automobile sector. I want to welcome first R.C. Bhargav, the legendary chairman of Maruti Suzuki. Welcome, sir. Great to have you with us. We're delighted that you could make the trek to the India Today Mediaplex. Very happy to have you with us. Shweta Pun joins us. She's a senior editor at India Today magazine. Just hold that magazine cover out. Unsold. That's the photograph, and unfortunately is from a Maruti Suzuki yard. 500,000 cars at this moment, 500,000 vehicles. 500,000 vehicles at this moment lie unsold. That's inventory worth 35,000 crore rupees. Flanking her, we've got Winnie Mehta. He's the Director General of ACMA, one of the key industry associations. Outside the India Today Mediaplex at this time, we've got Rakesh Sharma, the Executive Director of Bajaj Auto, joins us from Pune. BVR Subbu is one of the top industry experts, has spent a lifetime in India's automobile sector, understands the ins and outs of what ails the automobile sector and the way forward. There are problems galore that the Indian automobile sector faces. You've got inventory piling up across yards in the country, and you've got companies in deep panic and distress, and it's now leading to layoffs. Even legendary brands like Mahindra and Mahindra, Tata, Suzuki having to let go initially of the temporary workers, and very soon it'll move to permanent workers being laid off as well. Chaiti Narula files our lead story.
It is official now. The auto industry is in reverse gear in India. The Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, or SIAM, released some very depressing figures. 2.3 lakh jobs lost. 300 dealerships across the country shut. In July 2019, 18% of sales dip. This is thus far the worst the auto sector has seen since the year 2000.
The degrowth is impacting all segments of the vehicle industry, and we have seen these numbers, this kind of high degrowth in any particular month, almost after 19 years.
There has been the sentiments because people were expecting a lot after the elections, which unfortunately didn't happen. Then everybody was waiting for the budgets. Even after the budget, there was nothing great that happened. So all this continuation has really brought the auto sales very, very down.
The downturn appears to be very widespread. We have had downturns in 2008-9, 2013-14. But this time every segment of the industry, the passenger cars, SUVs, commercial vehicles, small, large, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, everything is in a degrowth phase.
The industry body can only hope for a stimulus package. Taxation is a hard bullet to bite, along with fast-changing regulations in India. The impact of the NBFC crisis and demonetization has left a severe liquidity crunch in the overall economy.
From a very weak monsoon, secondly, there was a liquidity cash crunch.
India seems on a very severe downward spiral month after month, and that is indeed very worrisome. This is probably the 10th or the 11th month.
The figures underscore the severe crisis the Indian auto sector finds itself in, which has a ripple effect on other sectors and the overall economy. Industry leaders have warned of massive job cuts.
has an impact on the growth because 8 to 10% of potential buyers are not able to get financing now. So that is one. And the second one is the interest rates, which have been reduced policy rates by 1.1 basis point now, or 110 basis point now, but that has not really been passed on in a major way.
While the automakers wait for a stimulus by the government, 10 lakh jobs remain threatened. Vendors and component manufacturers hang by a cliff due to tight liquidity conditions and poor consumer sentiment.
So the first big question I put on this discussion, who is to blame for the crash in India's automobile sector? Remember, there is no consensus on what the problem has really been sparked by. Till about September 2018, auto industry experts feel everyone was gung-ho. Suddenly, there's been a massive crash in consumer confidence. Let me put that question to R.C. Bhargav first. What, according to you, is the principal evil or the principal devil that's leading consumers to just stay away from buying any vehicle?
Okay, Rahul, before I get into that detail, let me tell you the basic problem of the automobile industry and particularly of the car industry. It has never been an industry which has been looked upon kindly either by the government or any government, the state government or central government, or by the media, or by the intellectuals and the NGOs and others. They all feel that this is a terrible industry, despite clear and scientific evidence that the pollution from cars is between 2 and 3%. Invariably, when you hear people talk, they will attribute pollution to cars being the major problem of the country, which it isn't, but that's the way it's presented. The consumption of fuel rising and import bill attributed to cars, whereas cars consume only 1/3 of the fuel, petrol which is consumed in the country. And because it's looked upon as a luxury product in the old socialist way of thinking, people think that it is capable of being subject to any amount of taxation and trying to get revenues out of it. What has happened in the last few months, which has caused this problem now? Okay, cyclical downturns are a regular event in any industry. And it happened in 2008, it happened in 2013, it happened in 2018. But in 18-19, the industry lost only 1.4%. I'm talking of cars only, I'm not talking about only 1.4%. Suddenly in this quarter in July, the thing became much worse. And so we were looking to see what has happened in these last few months. One of the things which emerges is that while this downturn was going on, the customer has been hit by two major cost factors, not small amounts. One was the earlier decision, which couldn't have been foreseen when it was taken, that it would come at the time of a downturn of improving the safety standards of cars, airbags, ABS, crash tests. For a small car, which is the entry-level car for the guy who upgrades, the cost, including GST, is about 23,000 rupees. Now, if in a downturn, suddenly you find that your minimum level vehicle gets 24,000 and the total on-road cost of the car is just over 3,30,000. It has to have an impact. That's one, and that's across the board. Secondly, several state governments, 9 of them to be exact, have in the last few months substantially increased the road tax on cars. Yeah. Now, the increase of these road taxes ranges from 1% to 3% to 5% even. And in a state like J&K, the highest amount which goes up is as much as 97,000 rupees on a car. So the combined effect of these two, plus of course the insurance bit and the higher financing costs, has made the burden of buying a car very heavy on the consumer. And that's why the demand has fallen off.
But Winnie Mehta, it's just not about passenger vehicles, whether these are commercial vehicles or two-wheelers as well. There's a crash of sorts. The numbers that came out just last month are very depressing. Some companies have reported sales being reduced to the extent of 36%. This hasn't happened in 2 decades now. Why do you think it's happening?
Well, continuing the thread from what Mr. Bhargav said, let's say look at the two-wheeler industry, very rural economy dependent. The monsoons were delayed, erratic monsoons, delayed monsoons. That also impacts the entry-level cars. The cost of insurance went up. For two-wheeler industry, even something like a 3,000 to 4,000 rupees insurance cost can really, derail the market. Last year, in the commercial vehicle industry, we had the axle loads increased by 25%. That literally means you legitimatize overloading, right? 25% of the market was sucked out, and the industry hasn't been growing at that rate. So all in all, and with the liquidity crisis, both at the dealership level and the consumer level, increased prices because of the regulatory changes that we are going through. The industry has invested something like 70 to 80,000 rupees on BS6, let alone whether we'll recover it or not. The prices of the products are going up and the consumer is not buying. And that apart, apart from the perception that Mr. Bhargav talked about, there is this new thing, too much focus on EV maybe from the government. The consumer is thinking that maybe around the corner there are newer, better products available, but which is not the case. So unfortunately...
Subbu, do you believe that electric vehicles are the gorilla in the room, because the government now seems to be pushing so aggressively towards electric vehicles, even though they keep telling us that they are not, and that it's not going to be compulsory, that consumers at the back of their minds have decided that their next vehicle purchase is going to be an electric vehicle, and therefore let's hold off all petrol and diesel vehicles. Inka time gaya, electric vehicle ka time aayega, so let's just wait for EVs.
I don't believe consumers are looking at EVs as the next big thing to happen just yet. Definitely not in cars. I do believe that even in two-wheelers, I think it's at least 2 years away before you can see a major swing towards EVs. It's primarily in the three-wheelers, whether it's e-rickshaws, the e-autos, that you will find that happening. But has that really impacted so much? I don't believe. I believe there are a variety of factors that have caused this kind of thing. I mean, after all, let's look at it. I heard Mr. Bhargav talking about 22,000 rupee increase because of safety. Now look at 22,000 rupees. What is 22,000 rupees on a 5-year EMI? 500 rupees a month? Now, 500 rupees a month is not going to impact so much. It's a cost of a pizza that people are paying for. So is that really hurting people so much that they stay away from purchase? I don't believe that. I believe what's happening is really that you've seen a sharp downturn in what people's expectations of the future. I think that's been a critical reason. The other reason, I think...
No, just explain that a little further. You're saying people's expectations for the future are such that they don't want to buy cars. So are you saying that people are expecting
what's happening?
mass gloom, therefore they don't have the confidence and the appetite to go out and make big purchases?
Yeah, I believe there are a couple of issues there. Now look at youngsters, for instance. The new generation believes, I think, that experiences are more important than material purchases. So I was writing for your sister publication just the other day that, I think a lot of youngsters believe that going to Iceland for a holiday is probably more important than buying a new car, so they'd rather use shared mobility. Now, that kind of a thing is impacting. Shared mobility, I was doing some calculations, I believe, has led to, for every 4 or 5 vehicles that have gone into shared mobility providers, you have lost, for every vehicle that has gone into shared mobility providers, you have lost at least 4 to 5 new vehicle sales. The truth of the matter is that if you look at a vehicle that costs maybe 6 lakhs or something like that today, at the very minimum, with a driver, your cost of operation, if you're doing 1,500 kilometers or so in a month, your cost of operation is 28 rupees per kilometer. Now, why on earth would you then look at buying a new vehicle?
That's an important point you make, because I spoke to some other CEOs, Mr. Bhargav, in the automobile sector. This is a point they made repeatedly, that this new generation that's entering the workforce at this time would rather Ola or Uber their way from work to home and vice versa than make the effort of buying a Maruti Suzuki. So don't blame Bharat 6, don't blame EVs. It's a structural change. The purchase dynamics are changing and the sector needs to deal with it.
I don't entirely agree with that at all. Because firstly, the sale of cars to the Olas and the Ubers have not gone up at all. In fact, they've gone down. And if a large number of people...
No, but that's the point that Mr. Subbu is making,
No,
that once you've got used to Ola, Uber, you don't need the Mahindras, the Suzukis and the
Rahul,
Tatas.
I'm making a different point. If so many people were shifting to Ola, Ubers, the number of cars being bought by Olas and Ubers would go up. It's not
But there's a
happening.
multiplier factor at play. If you got one Ola Uber, that's equal to 5 or 6 new cars.
But the replacement of the Ola Uber comes much faster. When an ordinary car is not replaced for 15 years, an Ola Uber is replaced after 2-3 years.
Okay, Mr. Subbu, it's fashionable to talk of shared mobility. We heard a lot of this at the World Economic Forum at Davos as well. But R.C. Bhargav contests that, saying it may be a factor. At best, it's a tangential factor. It's not central to this structural downturn. Mr. Subbu.
My own belief is that at least a million and a half vehicles have probably gone into the Ola Uber system already. Yes, when they come back for replacements, what will happen? That's what we have to wait and see. Now, on the other hand, if those cars decide that fine, we will go ahead and refurbish our vehicles with new engines or new transmissions, rather than actually come out and buy new vehicles, you could see completely different things happening. Or you could actually see those vehicles moving out into smaller markets, and some new vehicles being bought in the large metros, the Delhi, the Bombay, the Bangalore, and so on and so forth. So I don't know how this is panning out as yet, but it's going to be interesting to watch.
Shweta, you've got a comprehensive piece in India Today magazine. You've looked at all the aspects. What, according to you, is driving this mega slowdown?
So I think, Rahul, it's a combination of factors, and I'd like to disagree with Mr. Bhargav here on how the government and the media have treated this industry badly. Actually, India has given this industry the much needed impetus it needed. In the 80s and the 90s, when the sector was opened up, that's what enabled the big auto companies to come up. India has strategically focused on building highways and roads, which works for the automobile sector, not so much on railways and metros, which are coming up now. So I think it's a combination of factors. Regulatory changes is a crucial component. The auto industry was not geared for it. They were resisting it. The government was stubborn about it. So I think there's a disconnect there. Then the NBFC crisis. Dealerships bank on the shadow banking sector to finance themselves, to get inventory. So there was a funding crunch there, and I think that of course fed into the whole crisis. Then policy uncertainty. I think electric vehicles, this entire rhetoric around let's phase out diesel vehicles, let's bring in electric vehicles, that's made the consumer very unsure about what vehicle to buy next, and access to finance. Because banks are going through a tough time, lending norms have become tighter. Loans are not as easily available as they were, say, 3-4 years ago, when a bank official would come to your house with the loan papers and say, here's your loan, go ahead and buy your car. It's not happening anymore.
So in fact, dealerships have been complaining that you've got consumers coming, checking out cars, but ultimately, after all the paperwork is over, their request for a loan is being rejected, is just held back, delayed, to a point where the consumer decides he doesn't want the car at all. So we've spoken about four-wheelers. I want to go across to Rakesh Sharma, the executive director at Bajaj Auto. The slowdown extends to the two-wheeler sector as well. What, according to you, is the principal reason? Because two-wheelers are much cheaper to buy than a four-wheeler. So not wanting to buy a Maruti Suzuki just because it costs so much more money, but why is it that two-wheeler manufacturers are suffering as well, in your view?
Well, my view is not very different from the ones which have been already expressed. It's the unfortunate combination of, macroeconomic issues, then the issues which are very specific to the auto industry, and these are all around costs, which are either driven by regulatory demands or even things like increase in insurance costs and road taxes. These are like the proverbial last straws on the camel's back. And the third factor, which actually cannot be underestimated, is all the talk which is swirling around, even whilst a policy is not fully baked, leading to a huge amount of uncertainty. The man on the street is thinking that essentially the decision-making process is a bit discretionary, and the man on the street is thinking, let the dust settle down and I'm going to take my call in 6 months or 9 months. There'll be a little bit of hardship. I'll go through it. And all these things are combining to create the situation which we are in right now.
Gopal Agarwal is a spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party, now joins us on this broadcast. The government has to take a part of the blame because about 60,000 plus crore rupees was spent by automobile manufacturers in gearing up for Bharat 6, which comes into play only in April 2020. Even before those new models have been rolled out and a lot of that capital expenditure has been recovered, you're now talking about electric vehicles. How is any manufacturer, how is any industrialist, how is any company supposed to function if there's so much discretion in what the government will push for and push towards?
No, Rahul, I understand the problem is there in the auto industry. There is a slowdown, there is an issue which are structural in nature. There are issues with regard to policy implementation also, but at the government level you have to take a decision with, considering all the larger issues as well. But we, as the finance minister and the government, other officials in the government are saying that we will look into the concerns and set the things correctly. So the issue is that there is nobody can say only the government policy is responsible for this sudden slowdown, some slowdown in this sector. It is a cyclical also. There are structural issues that we have discussed at the postponement. Ultimately, I agree that there is a big case for sentiment also, where the sentiment that the future prices, there will be change in the policy, so the postponement of the decision, fall in the prices, all these.
No, but you're almost speaking like a third party in this, whereas a lot of these impulses are driven by the government, and the government has to take responsibility for its part of the mess.
No, there is only, what is government has only one thing which can be said that the government has to check and look into is the policy of implementation of the electric vehicle. Other things, whether it mostly are cyclical and the liquidity, etc., the government is already
because the government has, Mr. Bhargav, given some indication, the Niti Aayog has spoken, that the EVs will not be made compulsory and the policy is still some time away. So don't imagine that your Bharat 6 money won't be recovered. So the government is giving some assurance. Do you think it's a little late in the day?
Let me clarify, not at all. It has always been clear that the pace of introduction of electric cars is going to be slow. The earlier target, don't remember what was said earlier, but even 30% penetration of electric cars by 2030 has never been said officially to be valid. Right. And most experts have been saying that maybe it will be 15 or 20%. Now remember, India is a growing market. And with that growing market and the volumes of cars which are being sold today and which will be sold in 2030, that number will be more than double. And if you take out the portion which will be electric cars, the non-electric car component of manufacturing would actually be much higher than what it is today.
But can I counter-argue and say that your assumption that it will take up to 2030 for 30% of the vehicles to be electric, if at all it may take even longer, is based on the premise that electric vehicles will continue to grow at the speed at which they are growing globally and trying to extend that to India, whereas it could just be a time and place idea. That the world is convinced, consumers are convinced that electric vehicle is the way to go, Rahul, and they're holding back their purchase.
It's not true. We are
on what basis do you say it's not true?
Because we are in the business, we know the technology. There is no technology available today which will make an affordable small car in India. It will not happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years. To expect that electric cars will happen in the next few years is just impossible. It's not going to happen, whatever government may say. And remember, you cannot make electric cars in any numbers till somebody starts making batteries in India. There's not one single battery maker who has yet even indicated an interest of investing in India. The reason that is not happening is because battery technology is under a great deal of research all over the world. And the expectation of most people is that battery technology will change substantially in the next 5 to 7 years. And if the battery technology is going to change to 5 to 7 years, Who is going to spend 10, 20, 30,000 crores on putting up a plant now with old technology which will become defunct? And so before we all talk and take this electric vehicle so too seriously and blame government, please understand that these things cannot happen unless the components of the electric vehicles are available.
So while that may be true, but Shweta, the reality is many consumers, and I know, an honest confession, even we would have changed our car by now, but we're also waiting for an electric vehicle to come in because it just naturally, for reason, nothing, no offense to you, Mr. Bhargav,
that's us,
but
Rahul.
it's also to do with the environment, and generally you feel that don't have a diesel guzzler SUV, the next vehicle should be an electric vehicle. Consumers have made up their minds. The likes of Mr. Bhargav can say what they will, but there are many consumers who made up their mind that we'd rather wait.
Those are the consumers who buy the more expensive, bigger cars.
Okay.
Yes, bigger cars in small numbers will become available. Yes. People who want to buy bigger cars, who are willing to pay 25, 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs for the car, will be able to buy a car. You have a Hyundai Kona available today. Sure. It's 23 point some lakhs, but not too many people are buying it, a few hundred people. So that shows the size of the market
and there is
for that
no
car.
ecosystem, Rahul. As
there
in,
no
when
ecosystem.
you invest into an electric vehicle, you're going to think, where is the charging station? Can you think of taking the car out of Delhi?
But that's also a catch-22. The moment people start buying vehicles, the supporting infrastructure comes up.
Needs to come up.
I will not buy a car if I know that tomorrow I'll get stuck on the road with nowhere to go.
Most people say these cars go for 70 to 80 kilometers. Most people in the big cities travel for lesser than 70, 80 kilometers. If you've got a charging station at home, you've got one in the parking bay in office.
Half the people who buy small cars do not have any facilities for charging at home because they don't park at home. They park on the roadside where there's nothing to charge the car from. So it's not that easy. The power infrastructure, the distribution infrastructure is inadequate to provide the extra power which would be needed if there were 500,000 electric cars in Delhi. Where would you charge them from? Where is the electricity? Where is the distribution system? Because the distribution system breaks down. You put a load of extra 10 kilowatt and you have things blowing up that the load is not there. So please look at the practicality. If people are expecting to sell electric cars in large numbers, it's not going to happen.
And it's not happening across the world actually at the moment.
No, but it's interesting. So I want to build on this. You've got a thread where people are convinced that electric vehicles are here to change the world, when in reality, industry experts and those who know what they're talking about are saying with certainty that that's not going to happen, at least for cheaper automobiles, for several years to come. Then what is the way forward? So when we return with part 2 of this India Today special broadcast, we'll try and shift gears and look at what needs to be done. So we've beaten our chest enough. We've tried to understand what the problems are. What's the way forward? We'll deal with that in part 2 of this special broadcast. Stay with us. We're back on the other side.